Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Justin with Deep Dive Stocks, and today we're going to be doing a live chat on liquidity. And if you haven't, I definitely think you should come to one of the live chats. There's Sunday every week at 12 p.m. Eastern. I dropped the Zoom link in the Discord, so if you would like, hop over to my website, deepdivestocks.com, grab the Discord link, and join us next Sunday. We tend to talk about some pretty cool stuff. So, all right, without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. And yeah, enjoy. See you. That not everyone, I think people have like one view of what liquidity is. And it's not, I don't think it's a very comprehensive view. And so I think it is really worth our time to just dig into it, figure out when I say that, a stock is liquidity is leaving a stock, like what does that mean? What does that actually tell us about the health or the behavior of the bid and the ask and how they're interacting with each other? So in order to do that, though, like most things in the market, liquidity is one of those concepts that has it's like a Russian nest egg. It has 6 different concepts inside of it. So today, really, we're just going to work through some standard examples and just get a feel for what liquidity is, what it's not. And then we're going to take that and then use it next week to brainstorm our own liquidity metric. As usual, these talks are best when you guys, if you want, participate, ask questions, throw out ideas. You don't have to use voice. I have the chat box up, so if you toss a question in there, that's perfectly reasonable. And yeah, that's what we have on the plate today. Is there any questions before we get started, or any thoughts, comments, or concerns? No, cool. If not, just tap a 1 in chat if you don't mind. That way I know that at least I'm talking to someone. Maybe. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. All right. So our goals today, we had a few goals, but like I said, I did divide this out into 2 talks. Those of us who have been here for a few weekly chats know that occasionally my ranting can lead to some long live chats. So as I was finalizing and preparing the notes for this, I was like, we gotta cut this in half. Because one, I think it's cool. I could rant about this stuff for days, but we do kind of gotta watch out for time. So our main goal today is really, we just want to gain like a general familiarity with liquidity. So today we're not going to get into the math of it. We're not going to, crunch numbers. We just, again, kind of like in our previous weekly chats, we want to gain this conceptual feeling for what liquidity is, so that when we do start tackling the math and whatnot, it intuitively makes a little bit more sense. And when you kind of can get something intuitively, the numbers and maths sometimes seem less daunting. Then we're going to get some practice in the second half of this talk with identifying kind of different liquidity zones. How do you spell identifying? Identifying, that's how it's spelled now. Liquidity zones. And I know that like Conway uses a lot, I forget the name of the program, but it shows you like those liquidity zones on the price. What is it?
Bookmap. It's called Bookmap. It just takes a look at the current order book to see where all the resting limit orders are, and it maps it out on your screen in different colors depending on how heavy, how deep, how many shares are being placed at different price points.
Yeah, and actually that's so cool because it fits really well in today's talk, because we're going to see that there's some concepts of liquidity that depend on what's called like the market depth or the order depth, the book depth. But then there's some concepts of liquidity that don't need those or like they don't need the view of what is happening outside of the immediate bid and ask. So it's going to be cool to tweeze out liquidity and then hopefully apply it to bookmap, because you're going to really, I think, get a solid grasp of, okay, what is bookmap actually showing me? And what does that mean for the volatility that I'm experiencing right now, or the liquidity that I'm experiencing right now? And then there was one more. What was it? Oh yeah, then we're just, we're going to look at how, so because liquidity can affect the price, right? But then the price itself can affect liquidity. So we're going to start to get, and that's part of the reason why liquidity can be difficult to tweeze out, because it's kind of this self-sustained, self-motivating system. And so we kind of, part of the reason why we're going to spend a lot of time today looking at liquidity at different angles is because we need to really pin down, like, when this is happening, when liquidity is affecting the price, and we need to really be able to pin down when the price is more moving liquidity. Okay, so that's our goals today. Any questions? If we're all good, pop a 1. Cool. I'm going to assume we're all good. It was just the introduction page. All right. So, and a lot of I think the starting of this talk is going to be me ranting a little bit, or just raving, just to kind of set the foundation of what we're going to do. So liquidity can be conceptualized as 4 distinct kind of entities or phenomenon in the market. And the first is the one that you'll probably hear me refer to the most, because it's kind of the more all-encompassing, which is just how smoothly things are running. When things are running well, things are said to be liquid. When things are liquid, volatility is low. Another way that liquidity can manifest is by the market's own expectations of the price movement. When things aren't liquid, and if my handwriting gets too bad, let me know. If things aren't liquid, then the asset's price typically will experience large jumps in price, and this can affect how we anticipate the movement of price over the next day, week, or month. Then we have this concept of the cost of stability. And we're going to see that liquidity or volatility is telling us what the cost of the participants in the market who must sell or purchase shares are, where they are willing to expend or lose extra money in order to maintain their position, whatever position that may be in the market. And then we're going to see that liquidity can also be the cost of the opportunity. So if I enter the market and I just really want to get rid of these shares, I need the opportunity to sell these shares. Well, there might be an associated cost to finding a buyer, to finding a bid. How are we feeling on this so far?
I have a question, Justin.
Love it. What's up?
Well, you said not liquid, large movements. It's not jump. It's more like large movements, right? It could go either way.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's actually a really good point, because we're gonna see hopefully later on through like all my ranting that which direction the price jumps can tell us which side is capitulating, right? So which side is...
I was just thinking jump implies goes up. I mean, it sounds to me that way.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so it could be up or down. But that is a good point, because it's going to become important later, actually. So thank you. Yeah.
I have a question, because we've been talking about this a lot in the Discord. When a stock is largely being influenced by volatility for its price movement, we talk about Vanna squeezes and how heat maps are dominated by Vanna. Do you have any insight into how those typically resolve? Like, is there some statistical likelihood of it going down or up? Similar to like gamma squeezes typically resolving in 4.8% down.
Right.
Is there some data behind what happens when a stock finds itself in a Vanna squeeze situation?
Not empirical yet. Vanna squeezes, one of the reasons that I haven't dove into that is that their Vanna squeezes are particularly diverse in their orientation. Like for instance, when we have a gamma squeeze, you know, the heat map really has one configuration. You'll have purchasing support above spot, and then you'll have selling support or selling pressure below spot. But with the Vanna squeezes, you can have two different configurations where you can have the blue on the left and the red on the right, or reversed. So, and that changes the dynamic, and that changes the way that the Vanna squeeze can evolve. It's a little outside the scope of this talk, but so the take home point really is not yet, but take note, I would say, if you find gamma hedging heat maps that have that Vanna squeeze configuration, notice when the selling pressure is on the left versus the right, and then conversely, when the purchasing pressure support is on the right versus the left, because one of those will be a self-sustaining Vanna squeeze where as the conditions get worse, the orientation of how the hedging occurs will kind of stabilize the stock, versus when the other type of Vanna squeeze, which is more of that runaway price action, where as the conditions get worse, the Vanna squeeze gets worse, and then that drives more bad conditions.
Gotcha.
Is that fair?
All right. Yep.
So, but that's programmatically, that's why it's difficult to analyze them, because you can't, like in a gamma squeeze, you can sort of cut, like if you're just identifying a stock in a gamma squeeze, you can cut some corners to cut down on the computation time, but you can't do that with Vanna squeezes because you need the full environment to figure out which type or which configuration of Vanna squeeze it is. But we're working on it. Good question.
I have a question.
Sounds good.
I have a question.
Hey, what's up?
Okay. So I was wondering, I saw a couple of times the gamma configuration there on the reports and the website, and the axes were configured in a way that if price goes down and volatility goes down, then you would see, you know, either buying hedging or whatever the gamma hedging would be. Now, in reality, we all know that just by how the skew is built, so you have more premium generally on the downside, just like the VIX is. So automatically, when something goes down, the implied volatility goes up. So those configurations that have the inverse, they would never happen. They would never happen.
Well, that's, the heat maps don't show the premiums. They don't show the value or the cost of the options themselves. So the heat maps demonstrate the hedging environment. So how the hedging, which is predominantly, I guess I should write it, gamma hedging for the options dealers, how that changes. And so that is, so you are correct in that, like if we were just looking at the value or the cost of the options themselves, then some of those configurations would be impossible, because, you know, by Vega alone, if the volatility drops, well, then the value of your option, long option, drops as well, right? So it would be odd to see any other configuration. But because the hedging heat maps cover hedging, which can be pretty dynamic, you can get quite a wide variety of the way that the options dealers have to purchase or sell shares depending on how the price and the volatility change. So the main Greeks, I would say the main Greeks that are baked into the hedging heat map are delta, gamma, and not Vega, but Vanna. And so those change pretty dynamically and aren't necessarily always associated with the premium of the option itself, if that makes sense.
Well, if you look at what you just draw, you have on the x-axis, on the lower axis, sometimes you assume that as price goes down, volatility would go down. And that's what I mean, that when the reports come out that way, that never happens in reality. When the price goes down, the volatility would go up, the IV would go up. Regardless of the premium, just for a second, when your IV axis is inverted, meaning that price goes down, you assume that volatility goes down, that just can't happen.
Well, I
mean, it can theoretically, if they're bringing the price to a certain strike where they have all the straddles sold there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that could happen, but generally in the US it doesn't. I mean, as price goes down,
so the typical, I think there's like kind of several concepts here. The first is that the heat maps are, the axes are independent, so they don't join where they meet. So simply the price axis is a calculated range. I think the way that I craft the heat maps is I take one of the expected price ranges, I forget which, and I simply just find the upper and lower limits for, I think it might be the 2-week EPR. I'd have to look into the code.
Okay.
And I just pick the high point, the high value of the expected price range, and then the low value. And then I do a very similar thing for volatility.
I got it. Now that you just mentioned that they're not necessarily related, now I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I get it. Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. It's good for me to know so that when I go and either describe it or write up like educational stuff. But that's perfect. Yeah. So those axes aren't necessarily dependent. And you are correct that the majority of the time, if the spot goes down, volatility goes up. But we do have some examples later on in the talk where that's not the case. And when that isn't the case, what can we start to deduce out of that environment about the relationship between the bid and the ask? And we're not going to get too much into, because I already know, I feel like it's going to start cooking in your brain. So I'll toss it out there. We're not going to get too much into like the characterizing the price sensitive lot. So the people who are like, they have a vested interest in transacting at a particular price, or versus the price insensitive lot, who they don't necessarily care about what the bid or the ask is. They just need to fulfill their obligations. But that does have a dynamic as well. And we're going to see it peep its head up, but we do have an example later on where price goes down, volatility goes down. And we're going to kind of investigate that a little bit. But yeah, cool. Any questions?
Okay, well, just one more thing, just to lay some type of foundation. I mean, I'm market making options, European options in Germany and Israel for ages. And I just want to make sure that what I know happens there. The hedging that we do is not through stocks, because these are European options. But regardless, as I'm aware, also through Susquehanna and other big players in the US, hedging is fully automated, meaning that you have a risk tolerance for the Greeks, and when you hit that tolerance, the hedging is automatic. Whether it is, I mean, the short squeeze that we had a week ago on the US markets, that was like the biggest I ever saw, ever. Like huge amounts of shorts and hedging and everything. Like it basically fed itself and propelled. So I just want to make sure that the same is for the US market, in terms that you assume, or we assume for this conversation, that the hedging is automatic.
So the hedging predominantly is automatic, and it predominantly occurs at around 11 a.m. That is when the risk compliance of kind of like the regulatory agencies come in and kind of need the books to be set appropriately. So that's why in US equities, you always, I kind of call it the lunchtime bump, and you always notice that around like 11 a.m. to noon, overall the market tends to rise, and this is a direct consequence of that risk compliance. The other part of that, though, is there are times when hedging becomes a manual process, like these past few weeks, where the risk tolerance, either liquidity is super low, absurd price movements are occurring, where the options dealers will step in and more actively hedge. So they'll start participating not in just like the lunchtime hedging requirement, but they'll actually, you'll see them start hedging consistently throughout the day, just because the risk or the environment that their positions have placed themselves require a more hands-on approach, if that makes sense. And I do think, I haven't looked too much into it, but I do think that the US options do carry with them a slightly greater risk than the European ones, especially for the options dealers and the market makers who participate in that, just because the European options are nicely unexercisable until expiry, right? But if you're an options dealer that's just sold, you know, a lot of out of the money puts that are now find themselves in the money, you're going to be much more actively securing that position with various forms of hedging. And the hedging isn't always done strictly just through shares. But for the purposes of, I think 90% of the conversations on hedging, they are, right? But good questions. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, you could probably give us tons of insight. I actually don't know too much about hedging European options. So if you ever want it, we could set you up with a live chat and you could teach us all. That'd be awesome. Did that answer some questions or thoughts?
Thank you.
Yeah. And feel free to chime in with any experience you have. It's phenomenal. All right, so let's move on. So we're just going to look through all four of those types that we can kind of visualize liquidity, kind of get a feeling for it, and then we're going to move on and start applying some of that. So let's look at the first example. And for those of you who are new, we have Sally, our resident trader, and joining us today is Betty, the baker. Now, in this scenario, Sally enters the market and she wants to sell her apple for $1, right? And these examples, I think, are maybe at times going to seem overly simplistic, but again, it's because we're kind of trying to tweeze out some finer details and some finer points of liquidity. And so Betty she enters the market and she wants to sell her apple for $1, so she sets her ask at $1. In this scenario, Betty thinks, hey, that's a fine price. So she gives Sally $1 and Sally gives Betty the apple. Pretty straightforward. And so it's kind of like anticlimactically straightforward, right? But the first question we have is, was the situation smooth or not? Right? Was it liquid?
Yes.
Yeah.
There was no like negotiating between price. There was no, ask was $1 and Betty is the baker.
Betty the baker.
Yeah. Market order, $1, done.
Yep. So would volatility be high or low?
Low.
Yeah, low, right? Because things are running smoothly. Things aren't volatile. Betty came, Sally came, they transacted, blah, blah, blah. The one question that I want to leave us with that we're going to see later, though, is what would happen if 5 more Bettys showed up? That's not a possessive. Or what if 5 more Sallys showed up? And this is a question to kind of just keep in the back noodle as we progress through this. But the idea is, can the smoothness be affected by how many players are in the field? Right? So let's look at the same example, but let's look at when this maybe isn't going so smoothly. So Sally comes again and she wants to sell her apple for $1. This time, however, Betty thinks that's outrageous. She doesn't think an apple should be any more than 95 cents. So now what happens? Are things running more smoothly or less?
Less smoothly. And what happens is that somebody needs to cross that spread to transact. So either Sally needs to come down and sell her $1 apple for 95 cents,
right? Or
Betty needs to agree to pay the $1 instead of the 95 cents she wants to pay, or they meet in the middle somewhere.
Correct. So either we kind of have 3 options, either or two. So someone capitulates, and that means either Betty purchases the apple for $1, or Sally sells for 95 cents, or they agree and they meet in the middle, right? And these are pretty, this is first, not too difficult of examples. Let's suppose that Sally capitulates and she says, all right, I'll sell this apple for 95 cents. What is the value? What is the market's value of this apple?
Just went down to 95 cents.
Yeah, 95 cents, right?
Yeah.
And
there's a fourth possibility too, but I'm probably complicating things unnecessarily.
no, throw it out there. What do you got?
A market maker steps in and facilitates the trade.
This is true. This is true. And in fact, I would say that one of the overarching themes of this is we're actually throughout this talk going to be describing how both what the function of the market maker is and how we can tweeze out when the market maker starts to step in, or when, sometimes the risk tolerance or the spreads may be unfavorable for market makers, so they won't step in, right? They won't provide that liquidity to the stock. But then sometimes we can see a rush of liquidity despite nothing else changing. So maybe some market makers stepped in, right? But we're going to pretend this time this this village center marketplace doesn't have a market maker. They're not there yet, right? So, but in the interim, I just want to touch on the points, but you did say before we decided on who did what. So Sally's price is still her ask is still at $1. Betty's bid is still at 95 cents. Things were running less smoothly. Volatility was going up. And do we have anything else to mention here? We said that one of them would have to capitulate, and then the value would be based on which one capitulated. But again, one of the things I want to put in the back of our minds is what would happen if 5 more Sallys showed up, or if 5 more Bettys showed up. We're just going to keep that in the back of our mind. Any questions? So this is Smoothness. Smoothness is kind of like the straightforward. It's one of the reasons why I discuss liquidity a lot as Smoothness. It's super straightforward. How smoothly are things going? Is bid and the ask agreeing with each other? Are they not? What's going on? All right. Any questions on Smoothness? Pop a 1 in the chat if you're ready to go. Oh, wait, we actually have one more Smoothness. I'm sorry. Scenario 3. Sally, so Sally goes to the market and she wants to sell an apple for $1, but there's no bid. Betty the baker didn't show up today. What's the volatility here? Is it higher or lower compared to before?
Way higher.
Okay, we have 1 vote for higher.
No, not necessarily. Doesn't have to be higher. It can be actually lower.
Could be lower.
True.
Right. I'm gonna throw out there and say, in this vantage point of liquidity, there is no volatility. The concept, and this, it may seem esoteric and necessary, but I think it serves as a purpose. Because remember, we're looking at liquidity through these different vantage points. But if you're going to describe liquidity as how smoothly things are running, well, that predisposes us to the idea that something is running. But if there's nothing running, if there's no bid, if there's no counterparty, your machine is missing half of its components. There's no volatility here. There's nothing to be liquid. There's nothing to happen smoothly because nothing can happen.
Well, this assumes that there's only one strike, right?
Well, this is kind of, yeah, think of this more as like the equities, not necessarily the options.
Okay.
Yeah. So like now, granted, as we'll see later on, suppose Sally needs to sell this apple. She has an obligation to do so. Well, then that's going to change the statement somewhat. But as it stands right now, Sally just entered the market. She has an extra apple. She wants to sell it for $1, and she notices no one's here buying apples. Okay, no worries. She doesn't have a need to sell it.
She can drop the price. Maybe then she'll have prices covered.
Correct. Yeah, and we're going to talk about that later in the cost of stability, cost of opportunity. But right now, Sally's just going, all right, no worries, I'll wait. So we actually don't have really any volatility. And we can identify moments in the market where this is the case, but something to keep in the back of our minds. And again, I just want to point out that I'm pointing this oddity out because it is kind of an odd concept, but it is an exercise in when we look at liquidity through these various lenses, we want to be very strict in what we can and cannot see when we're peering through like this window of volatility. And through just looking at how smoothly things are running, if you don't have anything running, you can't describe the smoothness of that, how well it's running, because it's not running. If that makes sense.
As an aside, this is not, it may seem unusual, but it actually does happen. We saw it happen recently. I think a couple of months ago, we saw it with mortgage-backed securities apparently going no bid.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some people were very, very concerned about that.
But,
yeah,
for instance, too, and that's such a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. But like, let's put it on the back burner, but let's start like the simmering process for it now. Like, what would be the difference if a security had no bid and volatility was going up versus no bid and you don't really see liquidity changing too much, right? Because there is a difference there, and it tells you everything you need to know about Betty's position. And if she's, again, we're not going to get too much into it, but if she's a price sensitive trader or if she's a price insensitive trader, right?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like with the volatility increasing, the pressure to sell, even in a no bid environment or a low bid environment, is increasing. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, let's find out, maybe. All right, so to wrap up smoothness, when things are going smooth, right, things are liquid. When things are liquid, we have low volatility. This means that the bid and the ask, they're comfortable meeting each other at either at the ask, at the bid, or at some midpoint. The bid and the ask is probably pretty narrow, again, because they don't have to, even when they do meet at the other side, they don't have to jump, they don't have to do crazy allowances. And we notice too that in just this particular instance, we're only focused on the immediate bid and the ask. Right? When we described how smoothly things were running, we were only interested in the running portion of the transactions, which is immediately at the bid and the ask. So we weren't necessarily worried that maybe there was a Betty the baker over here that needs to purchase 1,000 apples and she only wants to do it at 50 cents. Because we didn't care about her because there was a Betty in front of her that was more than willing to spend $1 to purchase that apple. And since in this moment in time, there was a Betty and there was a Sally that met at $1, things are running smooth. So we can forget about the depth of order book, the bids and the asks that are later on. Reasonable? Maybe some of this. How does that feel for everyone?
Could you go over that last point again real quick?
Yeah, of course. So notice that when we were looking at the smoothness, so like the smoothness of trade. And the smoothness of trade only looked at the ask and the bid, how well those two were getting along, right? So the lowest bid and the, I guess also the lowest ask. Or no, that would be the highest bid, I'm sorry.
That makes sense.
Right? So we weren't concerned with all the bids waiting in line behind Betty the baker. We weren't concerned with all of the ask that was waiting in line behind Sally. We were just, when we look at the smoothness and when we describe the volatility of an equity based off of smoothness, we're really only looking at the immediate connection between the bid and the ask. Who is next up to trade? And this isn't always the case. We're going to see later on that the order book does start to matter. But for right now, we're only concerned with the Sally and the Betty immediately across from each other on the aisle. How does that feel?
It makes sense. And I see this in Bookmap all the time where a stock could be trading at $10, $20, but you zoom out and there's some enormous buyer sitting at some ridiculously low price that is nowhere near current price.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, like, just to carry us further, imagine if that's the case, and then every buyer between that large buy and the current price just disappeared. Would liquidity increase or decrease? Food for thought. All right. So now let's look at another one of the more straightforward ones and look at the market's expectations. Oh, sorry. Any questions? Any more questions on smoothness before I move on? We all good? All right. So the market's expectations. And for those of us who use the deep dive stocks reports, we know that this is one of the ways that actually all of these ways of measuring liquidity are in the reports, but this one is the most prominent because it shows up in the expected price range graphs and the expected price range table, which gives us that 68% probability for the upper and lower price ranges. And so how do we get to that? What does it conceptually mean? So let's suppose Betty the baker and Sally, again, are selling apples. And in this environment, they are getting along really well. And they keep the price of the apple in a like plus or minus $0.5 increment. So sometimes Sally will sell an apple at $1.05. Sometimes she'll sell it at the next day at $1.10. And for the most part, Betty's okay with that because she knows sometimes she's going to be able to buy an apple at 95 cents or 90 cents. And so the two have a good working relationship. Things are nice and liquid. And small variations in the price don't really perturb the two of them. Now, Dr. Dan over here is concerned because, as everyone knows, doctors hate apples. And he needs to know how many of his patients are going to be able to afford apples in the future, because that's going to give him a reasonable expectation of how many people's houses he can't go in. Right? He's like a vampire. This is a joke on an apple day keeps the doctor away. Okay.
We know.
I thank you. I know that everyone's like muted right now, and I assume you guys are laughing.
I'm laughing now.
Yeah. My type of humor is I do a bad joke, and then the humor is actually like me explaining the bad joke, but that's fine. So he wants to know, he wants to be able to project the price of the apple 1 week in the future. And in this scenario, he knows that the apple can occasionally rise in 5-cent increments. He wants to know what the price of the apple might be in 5 trading days. And let's say the apple starts at $1. So what would Dr. Dan's upper limit be for the price of an apple in 5 days? Well, since we'll say that he noticed that 5 cents is the variance, or how much the price of the asset can change in a day. Sometimes it might go up 5 cents multiple days in a row. Sometimes it might go down 5 cents multiple days in a row. So he knows that at most, if every day from today until 5 days, the price of the apple goes up by 5 cents, that's 5 days, 5 cents, 25 cents. So his expectation is $1.25. And what about his lower expectation?
75 cents.
Yeah. So same, but reverse, right? So Dr. Dan has a range of 125. I think I'm writing this backwards, to 75 cents. That's his expectations. Oops. But what if things aren't running smoothly? What if Sally and Betty have a feud? You know, they are in a moment in time where they're not okay with, they're not going to capitulate, either one of them. And so there are times when the price of the apple can jump 50 cents at a time. It depends on whoever has a greater need for their apple, or whoever thinks it's the most opportune time to grab apples. Is this environment more or less volatile? Because
More volatile.
yeah, right. So because there are times when Sally wants to sell her apple for $1 and Betty goes, "You're smoking straight crack. I'm only going to purchase this apple for 50 cents." And both parties refuse to capitulate. In this environment, do we expect volatility to go up or down? They have a standoff going on.
If neither side is willing to capitulate, wouldn't volatility actually go down instead of up?
I would think more freeze, but
Oh, okay.
and again, that is kind of like the technical answer in a way. But suppose that there is one of these parties has to capitulate. So we're going to add some, so we're going to sprinkle in a little bit of demand here.
Gotcha.
So what would we expect volatility to do? Probably
it would go up.
Yeah, go up, right?
Yeah.
These two are in a literal sense volatile against each other. And so we see these wild swings in price. Some days Betty's like, screw it. I got to get rid of these apples. I'll sell them for 50 cents. Other days she comes and she's spiteful and she says, nah, it's 150 today. But it also just so happens that on this day, Betty absolutely needs those apples. So she says, crap, I have to purchase these apples for $1.50. So we have these wild fluctuations in price, and the whole time volatility is increasing because it's becoming harder and harder for both of these parties to fulfill their needs, to fulfill their transactions. So then if the apple can go up by 50 cent increments in a day, what is Dr. Dan's upper limit for the price of the apple in 5 days?
$3.50.
Yeah, $3.50.
50 times 5 is $2.50. So plus $1 is $3.50.
Perfect. And then what would his lower limit be?
Zero.
So that's a much wider range, right? Like now he has a range of $3.50, whereas before, what was his range? 50 cents. So as things became less liquid, as volatility increased, we see that the market starts expanding the range that they would consider a reasonable range for the price of the apple to be in. Pretty straightforward, right? How we feel so far. And this is the concept of the expected price range graph. Right? It simply takes the volatility and it distills it down into the upper and lower limits for the price. So no magic there, but as Conway can probably say that the EPR limits are pretty well respected in the market.
Yeah, just to give some context to the listeners, a regular thing I've been doing is whatever I'm monitoring on any given trading day, I look at what the deep dive stocks expected price range is, and I mark them on my charts, or in my case, I mark them on Bookmap. And a couple of interesting things happen. One, you see these large pools of liquidity, just, coincidentally, not coincidentally, but, pretty much right where the expected price range is. And oftentimes, if a price moves to those pools of liquidity, they will respect the expected price ranges pretty well. Now, that being said, don't take it as a hard and fast rule. Don't take it for granted, because the trend is your friend. And, if a lot of bullish or bearish momentum comes through on any given day, it can totally smash right past that expected price range in either direction.
Yeah. The the expected price ranges are kind of, in my mind, amazing when they work, but it's one of those low hit probabilities, but high payout when it does. Just because, again, unfortunately, sometimes it's hard to tell when the market is going to respect that expected price range and then when it's not. Personally, I use them on SPY to scalp almost like pretty regularly. And they're pretty honest. They get outside of the extreme market conditions that we've kind of been in now. So like last year, the year before that, the expected price ranges were golden. Like I made the majority of my money or my portfolio growth in just scalping the expected price range graphs. But again, just to copy off what you were saying, Conway, so what Conway is saying, I wish I had a picture on his trading, is it kind of looks like a graph with the price. And then the graph shows him this mark where there is these pools of liquidity. And what he's saying is that this is typically at the expected price range that is noted on the deep dive stocks report. And it actually reminded me, Conway, we should like organize something of kind of doing a talk on the platform you use and the expected price range graphs. I am fascinated because, again, deep dive stocks kind of calculates volatility in a unique way. And so it's just super fascinating to see it pop up independently in a whole nother system that is measuring just like the depth of the order book. But
sounds good for sure.
Yeah, cool. Let's see. Price. We're not going to do that. All right. So the market's expectations, pretty straightforward. If things are running smoothly, the range of prices is pretty small. When things aren't running smoothly, you start to see the range of acceptable prices increase. And it starts expanding and expanding and expanding. And it becomes harder sometimes, depending on how you play in the market, to position yourself if things are very illiquid, just from a expectations standpoint. Okay. Any questions on markets expectations?
Something to keep in the back of everybody's mind, because I haven't looked too closely into this either, but a question that I have is, you know how a lot of people like to use volume profile and they trade off of pools of liquidity there, you know, supply zones and demand zones and stuff like that. Something that I would like to look more deeply into is to see where, you know, price volume distribution or volume profile fits in with the EPRs, the expected price ranges. I think there's probably a relationship there. So just keep that in the back of your minds, everybody, if you use that indicator, and I'll be looking into it as well.
For sure, for sure. And bringing up you brought something up in my head. Where did it go? Next week. So because I split this in two, next week will be part 2. We're actually going to piggyback off of that and look to see how transforming volume, because there's a way that you can transform volume into liquidity. And so I don't know if you saw my tweet, but the modified VWAP, which is substantially improved, does just that. That's the extra step that I'm always just so confused why no one does, because it's just it's so much more powerful, so much more potent. I don't particularly like it because it has a component of the stock's price in it, which I think is always it is a kind of, a lagging indicator. But in that regards, when you transform volume into an actual measure of liquidity, things become, it's like all the ducks align. And so keep that even further in the back of your mind, because it's not going to be until next week. But yeah, good points. Good points. All right. So the second to last, before we move on to the findings, I don't know why I have 2 of these, the funness of the examples. We're going to look at the cost of stability. And this is kind of one of those things where I remember a few weeks ago, we talked about the value of an option versus the value of the position that I'm in with that option. And sometimes those two aren't always the same. The classic example, I sell a call. I want the value of my call to drop. The more that the value of my call drops, the more the value of my position increases. The cost of stability and the cost of opportunity are kind of similar, but they're, I think, really important to pin down when you want to start identifying who is providing liquidity and who is taking liquidity in a particular environment. So let's look at another example. So Sally is selling an apple for $1. Betty is in a predicament. She needs an apple. She burnt her pie, and she has a customer waiting at her bakery for this pie. She popped it out of the oven and it was burnt. Betty, in a rush, says, $1 for this apple is golden. Here's your apple, or here's your dollar. Give me my apple. I got to go bake this pie. Was this situation liquid or not? Do we think the situation went smoothly? Did it not go smoothly?
I feel like we need more information because, well, at first glance, it went smoothly because Sally had the apple that Betty needed, but Betty really needed that apple.
Mm-hmm.
And the question that I have, which is, again, overcomplicating things because that's just who I am, is Betty going to need more apples, and does Sally have the apples to provide for Betty?
Did you read my notes?
No,
right?
I wish I had your notes.
But that's absolutely on point, right? But in this situation, Betty entered the market. She saw a reasonable price. She did her trade and left. So I'm going to say it was pretty liquid, right? And before we move on, the question I have is, what am I referencing when I say stability? So we're going to pause the discussion. We're going to dive into what do I mean by just even the concept of stability. Who needs what to be stable here? Well, Sally or Betty is a baker, hence the name, right? And she wants to maintain her position as a baker. She wants to keep baking. In order to do that, she needs to bake good pies. She needs to keep her customers happy. So the stability here is that of being a baker, maintaining her bakingness hood. She has, in market terms, she has an extra, and by extra I mean outside of, she has obligations outside of this immediate transaction that necessitate that she engage in this transaction. And if she doesn't engage in this transaction, some aspect of her existence will suffer. And in this case, it's that of being a baker. If she came to the market and said, I'm not paying $1 for this apple, well, then the customer at her store is going to wait longer and longer and longer, probably eventually leave. And if she keeps doing this repeatedly, she's going to no longer be a successful baker because she keeps burning pies and then making customers wait for the replacement pies, which is exactly what happens. So suppose in the second scenario, she comes and Betty again, or Sally again, is selling an apple for $1, and Betty is in a particular mood today, and she says, there's no way that I'm selling or buying an apple for 50 cents, or there's no way that I'm buying an apple for more than 50 cents. So Betty waits. And what's Betty waiting for? She comes to the market, huh?
She's waiting for the seller to capitulate.
Right. And does volatility increase or decrease?
I think it decreases.
Hmm.
I think it decreases.
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation. It could just freeze. But if somebody needs to capitulate,
Mhm.
it depends on who needs to capitulate.
Maybe. I'm gonna say
If
volatility.
increase.
Okay, wait, I'm sorry. I forgot this is a stock, not an option, right?
Correct.
Okay, so yeah, so theoretically, I mean, odds are that volatility would be perceived in this type of, I mean, the spread is huge. So
Exactly.
if it doesn't get tight and the move is huge, so the volatility would go up, obviously.
Exactly. Perfect. Because the spread is so large and things aren't running smoothly. Sally's not able to sell her Apple. Betty's not able to purchase her Apple. Volatility is increasing. Liquidity is draining from the stock. Because even if there's a line of sellers and a line of buyers behind these two, and no one is jumping line, jumping in front. These two are just looking at each other from across the aisle, waiting for the other to capitulate. And we saw this example before. This is a similar example when we discussed the smoothness. But now we know that Sally has an additional, or Betty has additional demand. The whole time that Betty is waiting, she knows that her customer is waiting for their pie. And Sally's just here going, I mean, listen, I'm going to sell this apple for $1. I'm not really too interested. I don't really have anything else going on in my life. I can wait. But Betty the baker has a demand. She has a need. And so Betty needs to decide, is this, oops, where did that go? Betty needs to decide, is this demand worth 50 cents? Is her need to fulfill this transaction, to purchase this apple, worth 50 cents? And if the answer is yes, then she purchased the apple for $1. And we can say that the cost of maintaining her position as a baker was worth 50 cents. What was the cost of maintaining her position as a baker in the first example? For Betty the baker?
$0. $1's a dollar.
Right.
There was no spread.
Because she walked in and said, I need an apple, and I'm totally okay with buying that apple for $1. So the associated cost of her stability, or she said that an apple's value is $1. That's reasonable. I'm going to buy it. And so that she had no cost of stability. Things were running smoothly. But in the example where she just is adamant, an apple does not cost more than 50 cents. So she waits a little bit. But as she waits, her demand, the customer in her shop waiting for that pie, increases. She can't not return with an apple and not make this customer who paid for a pie their pie. She has an obligation. She has to fulfill this order. So we see here that the cost of stability is added to the cost of the asset. Betty's needs outside of this transaction actually influence the value of this asset. It established it at $1. Because, we could easily reverse this. We could say, Betty comes to the market and she wants to buy an apple or she wants to sell an apple for $1. Betty is like, nah, I'm buying apples for 50 cents. And if Sally had the demand, suppose she's a broker and her client said, sell this, and maybe some Nancy Pelosi action going on. And she said, sell this stock at any price. I don't care. I need the stock out of my portfolio. Well, now there's a demand, and that demand might cost 50 cents. So she will happily sell her shares for 50 cents, or her apples. And in this case, volatility increased and the price decreased down to 50 cents. if there was like a waiting period or whatnot. Like suppose at first maybe Nancy Pelosi was like, get rid of these shares, and then no one was buying them at $1. So she was like, all right, drop the price. Right? What is the analogy here when we start talking about the cost of stability? What is the kind of the direct association we might be able to make? Like what type of demands and requirements might we think exist in the market that are forcing people to buy or sell shares regardless of the price?
The only thing I'm thinking of is hedging.
Yeah, definitely hedging is a big one, right? Hedging, we're going to put an asterisk because the answer is it's a soft yes. But yeah, just the idea that there exist times when someone enters the market and, or, I mean, it could be as simple as suppose Sally wants to get rid of, suppose Sally is in line, she's behind other people, and they're selling her the apples for much less. And Betty the baker is still purchasing apples for 50 cents. What if Betty's demand is so much that she jumps line, capitulates, and sells the apple for 50 cents? What if whatever need or demand she has does that? What would the value of the apple go?
Go down to 50.
Yeah, so we would see that huge jump or a huge drop in price. How we feel about the cost of stability?
Good.
Cool. So some take home points of the cost of stability is there are times when there are these extra market demands, varied, and a variety of them can pop up. This demand has a cost, right? I mean, most fundamental aspect of capitalism, a demand has a cost. If you need something, it's going to cost you. And this cost can cause, not only does the initial kind of hesitance to transact, maybe the initially we don't, or that party doesn't fully recognize the cost of that demand, so volatility increases. And eventually that capitulation of the party with the demand can cause large movements in price. Right? In this case, we saw that finally Betty the baker was like, listen, I can't wait any longer. This customer's at my shop. They need their pie. Screw it. I'm just going to pay $1 for this. When might, besides hedging, when might another time that this occurs happen? Maybe something not even options related. I kind of hinted at it before, but just to nail it on the head. Like when might someone advantageously take or they may advantageously identify the demand in the counterparty and use it to their advantage? Let's find out.
I mean, are we talking about like an information advantage, a time advantage? Like,
doesn't matter, right?
Okay.
This is just, there's just some extra market demand. And so say you come to the market, say you have insider information, and you know in a week, stock X is going to jump 100%. The president himself told you. It's pretty big shit. But what if I also know that, and I know that you know that? What am I going to sell shares to you at? You need to get into the stock. You need this money. So what am I going to do to my ask?
I'm going to increase it.
Constantly, right?
Yeah.
Because no matter what I increase this ask to, I know you're going to come
People will buy
crawling.
it. Yeah.
And in this situation, what is the price doing?
Price is increasing at a very fast rate.
And what is volatility doing? Do you want to keep buying at these higher and higher prices?
Not necessarily. So volatility is increasing.
Right. So they're part of those distinct times when price and volatility are both increasing, because the bid is capitulating and the ask knows it. This isn't a healthy relationship between the bid and the ask. You know, the price is casually rising. This is, I know that how badly you want in this stock, so I'm going to use that to my advantage. How do we feel about the cost of stability? Pop a 1 in chat if this is tracking. Maybe pop a 0 if I'm making no sense. And welcome, Anthony. Thank you, Tim. All right. What about the cost of opportunity? What about the cost of opportunity? Suppose, how many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 Sallies show up. And they all want to sell an apple for $1. 6 Bettys show up. And they all want to purchase an apple for 95 cents. What is the most likely event here? Or what do we think is going to happen here? How would we play out? You have 6 on one side wanting to purchase something for 95 cents, 6 on the other wanting to sell something for $1.
Well, some will capitulate one way or the other.
Yeah, someone's going to give in, and maybe even 2 people will give in. Maybe Sally and this Betty will go, I'm totally okay with like a 97-cent thing. So what was the cost of the opportunity of transacting this trade? What was the associated cost for Betty or for Sally?
3 cents.
Yeah, it cost her 3 cents. And how much did it cost the Betty?
Yeah.
She got what, 2 cents? So she got the deal. What's the value of the apple now?
97. It's gone down.
Yeah, 97. And if this occurred relatively quickly, pretty smoothly, what would we say about the liquidity? Did it go up or down?
Liquid. It was still liquid. So
yeah, it was
no
pretty
change.
liquid, right? Like we're saying, you know, as soon as the two recognized that they were in agreement, so we could say liquidity lowered and went down, right?
Sure.
What if the opposite was true? What if we had 6 Sallys, but we only had 1 Betty? And Betty, she still wants to sell her, or she still wants to purchase her apples for 95 cents. And the Sallys still want to sell their apple for $1. What's the most likely thing that's going to happen?
Yeah, obviously, if there are more sellers and buyers, then there would be a competition among the sellers, and trade would go off at 95.
Exactly.
But,
So,
but in the specific example that you decided to bring up, if these sellers are professionals and have some seniority, they would not want to.
the line.
They would not want to have like a no bid scenario, right? So if there's only Betty, everybody would be careful about selling.
Right. That's a good point. So let's add another Betty, right? And that actually segues beautifully in because the when we look at the cost of opportunity, or the opportunity as a way of describing volatility, is actually, it's beautiful that you brought that up. Once one of the Sallys says, okay, listen, I got to get rid of this apple. I'm totally okay with selling it 95 cents. So I'm willing to basically pay 5 cents to transact this apple over to Betty. And the way that the issue is now that there are no Bettys, just like, is it Itai? I don't know, sorry. But now there's no Betty. So we can ask ourselves two important questions. Who was providing liquidity? And who was taking? So in this scenario, who was providing the liquidity?
Obviously, Betty.
Betty. And who was taking the liquidity?
Sally.
Sally. Because without Betty, there's no ability to trade. There's no ability to trade. Things are grinded to a halt because you still have 5 other people that need to offload their apples. But is this always true? What if, do I have that example? No. But what if there were, what if this was reversed? What if this is Betty over here and she's willing to purchase for 95 cents and there's only one Sally who's willing to sell for $1? Who's providing liquidity here?
Betty, or sorry, Sally is.
Betty. She's providing the lubricant. She's providing the grease, because without Betty to transact, right? Because there's multiple buyers. One of those Bettys have to come in, step forward, and provide Sally the opportunity to trade. And so Sally, she's removing liquidity because, well, one of these, if they want, are going to have to capitulate down to Sally's price, or capitulate up to Sally's price of $1. So kind of in this scenario, who kind of has the power?
But obviously,
Buyer.
sorry.
Obviously who, but
The buyer has the power because they're the ones providing liquidity. Betty has the power, right?
I would say Sally, right? Because the opportunity of trading, one of these, if they want to trade, is going to have to agree with Sally. She's the only one selling apples. And we have 6 people who need apples. So why would she lower her price from $1?
Gotcha.
You know what I mean? So this, when we talk about like, this might cook some noodles, but when in this regard, when we talk about supplying liquidity, taking liquidity, so little backstory, traditionally it's considered that the seller is providing liquidity, they're providing like shares to be purchased, and the bid is removing liquidity. I think that this is a pretty like archaic and uninformative way of viewing liquidity. I think more so it's helpful to figure out who is helping this process along and who is not helping this process along. And in this scenario, if 6 people needed to sell apples and there were no Betty the bakers, well, they would need to consistently lower the price that they're willing to sell those apples. They are going to, the cost of the opportunity to sell those apples is going to increase because they need to attract the bid. They need to lower their price so that eventually someone is going to come along and go, okay, yeah, 10 cents for an apple is totally okay. And if Betty the baker is that person that comes along and says 10 cents for an apple is okay, she is the one allowing this transaction to occur. So she is providing liquidity. And in this case, the associated cost that one of these traders incurred is 90 cents, right? That is the demand, that is some factor in their situation that said, what I got going on over here is worth 90 cents in order for me to get rid of this apple, even if I'm losing money on the apple. So without Betty, none of this would happen. You would have 6 traders sitting here who need to trade something and can't. How does that feel?
Please,
Makes sense.
can you repeat the question?
Yeah, no worries. I was just describing the situation where you have these multiple traders who all need to sell an apple, but we only have one bid. So in this regard, because Betty is the only counterparty available, I consider her as being the one that is providing liquidity, because once she goes away, no trade, no transaction can occur. So there's more obligation for one of these sellers to drop their price to pay for the cost of the opportunity to sell their apples.
Obviously, she has all the power and liquidity, and obviously the first thing she would do is step down with the price.
Oh, for sure, right? Like I would immediately, if I recognize myself in this situation, like, congratulations, everyone. The price of an apple is 10 cents.
Ouch.
Like ante up. This market,
Yeah.
we ain't here to make friends in the market. I'm here to make money, right? And then no one would trade with me, and then it would be fun, right? So the associated cost of opportunity is just it is similar to the cost of stability, but sometimes you have to pay to trade, right? And we can see that in liquidity when we can see who is willing to capitulate or who is willing to pay for the front of the line ticket. Opportunity. And we saw too that, just like I said, like if you're greedy like me, this cost of opportunity can be quite expensive. And the more expensive, what happens to the range of the price? How much can the price of an asset move if the cost of opportunity is very expensive? So like if I'm willing to spend 50 cents on the cost of opportunity for an apple that is $1, and I need to purchase this apple, and I'm sitting there going, oh man, I really wanted to buy an apple for 50 cents, but I really need to get this trade in before anyone else. I need to be in the front of the line. So as the cost of my opportunity increases, what happens to the movement in the price of the underlying? It has a higher potential to do what? Swing, right? So the more the cost of opportunity, the greater essentially the EPR becomes. You have higher volatility. The price can move drastically depending on the inclinations of the bid or the ask, depending on who's incurring the cost, which I missed, sorry. But just to pinpoint exactly, in this situation, so we have 6 Sallys, 1 Betty. Who is paying the cost? So this is like just the original example. Who's going to end up paying the cost of the opportunity to trade here? And it's going to be Sally, right? One of these Sallys is eventually going to capitulate and go down in price to whatever Betty set her bid. So Sally is incurring that cost of opportunity. All right, how do we feel? We covered 4 main ways that we can view liquidity. We said we could do it just in a general sense of smoothness. And what was like a take home point of the smoothness? How could we just describe smoothness? So maybe just how the bid and the ask are agreeing. And if I wanted to, and this is going to be important for next week, if I wanted to measure the smoothness of the transactions on a given equity, what would I measure? What would I objectively look at in order to figure out how smoothly things are moving?
Bid and ask is right there next to each other.
Beautiful, right? Exactly. You would just simply, you could look at the bid and the ask, right? If the bid and the ask is narrow, you know that the two parties are agreeing with each other and the trades are going through. If the bid and the ask is wide, well, you know that now there's a disagreement going on. You know, why aren't they agreeing? Why aren't they just trading when they both need to trade? Perfect. Then we had the market's expectations. So this is just the price swings. Wow, I can't spell. Associated with liquidity. When things aren't liquid, the price of the asset tends to fluctuate in a larger range. And so what would I measure if I wanted to figure out my expectations of a stock's price in the future? What could I measure? How about I just measure the average price movement in the past? Or in other words, what's the other way of describing, hey, I'm going to look at how much the price moved on average in the past, and I'm going to project that forward to figure out what a reasonable expectation of price movement would be. How about historic volatility? The idea that I can look at how much something moved in the past, and that'll help me anticipate how much something should move in the future. We then looked at the cost of stability. And the idea that we can figure out, or liquidity describes the price of demand. Right? How much someone needs to enter this position. It's a little bit trickier to measure, so we're going to skip that part. And then we have a similar but somewhat different is the cost of opportunity. You know, suppose the market is ending and it's Friday, earnings is tomorrow morning, the market's about to close, and I really want to get into this stock. I'm probably going to be more willing to spend a little bit more than what I think the value of the stock is or what the current value of the asset is in order to secure my position, to get that opportunity, to get the earnings play going. Right? And so this can tell us the price of opportunity is who is capitulating. And also the relative size of the bid and the ask. But we'll talk about that later. So are there more bid? Is there more ask? Who has to jump line? Who's jumping line? So how do we feel overall on these four concepts of liquidity? Do they make sense? Do they not? Be honest. If no feedback, I'm just going to assume I did super well and we'll move on. Well, we're going to a 1 out of 1, I'm assuming, Tim. Thank you. 100%. And yeah, we're going to skip the next example just for time's sake, but then we're going to look at some actual real world examples. So we're going to do that next. If there's no questions, so if not, Pop a 1 in chat. Tim already did. 1 star. All right. All righty. I'm going to tell you. Let me get my notes.
Is this literally Apple?
Did you not see I have a theme going?
Oh, I can't see that on my screen, but I just looked at the price and I know that Apple stock is
Apple's-
around that price.
You have Apple's price movement locked in your head. I like it.
Yep.
What do you mean you can't see? Can you see the app of the circled apple?
I see like the tip of the AAPL. I don't, because
that
the heads up display or whatever, the toolbar on Zoom is obscuring that very bottom portion of the screen.
Oh, that's weird. I'll keep that in mind now. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to tell you that in Apple, there are 3 distinct behaviors here. There are 3 distinct zones of liquidity. And since it's our first example, I'll point them out to you. We have zone 1. And we have, I'm amazed that this thing doesn't have zone 2 and zone 3. So now just hang out for a second. Look at those 3 zones. And what
I have a question. Are you just dividing it in thirds, or is there something in the volatility graph itself that is making you decide on where the zones change?
It's actually, I believe, the combination between the price action and the volatility in each zone. So it's a bit, yeah, there are like 3 main scenarios here, if I understand.
Okay.
No, I just like the number 3. Did you get it?
Me too.
I assume you guys are laughing. You guys are muted though. It's fine. All right.
Oh, you didn't hear me?
No, I heard you. I'm cracking them bad.
Oh, sorry.
All my jokes
Okay.
are bad. But so okay, what's going on in? I just got to make sure I actually wrote the zones where they're supposed to be. Yeah, I think so. We're going to do just prior. My notes say just prior to mid-June because I can't, and that tracks. Let me do. Ta-da. All right, what's happening in zone 1? What is the price doing?
Price up, volatility down.
Right,
So
price up,
smooth functioning.
volatility down. So in this scenario, who is? I'm going to zoom out for just a little bit.
Yeah.
So zone 1, we said price is going up, IV going down. So the first question is, who is quote unquote capitulating here? Like who's meeting who? Is the bid meeting the ask, or is the ask meeting the bid?
Buyers are meeting sellers.
So the bid, right? Because they just kind of keep going up to the ask. But I say capitulate in quotes because why do we know that the bid isn't really capitulating necessarily? They're kind of actually, it seems, eager or happy to meet them at the ask. And how can we figure that out? I'm going to do something while you, so price up, volatility down.
Again, I could complicate things, but the simplest answer is bids are lower than asks. And so if the price is going up, you can safely assume that buyers are perfectly willing to pay that ask. And so that supports upwards price movement, and therefore we see price go up.
Right. And since we know the price is going up because the bid is going to the ask, the next question is, well, is bid being forced up to the ask, or are they going there willfully?
They're doing it willingly. Yeah.
Right. And we know that because
Volatility is going down.
perfect. So we know that capitulating is not really the word, but the two were, the bid and the ask are agreeing, and they are doing so in a manner that the bid is more than happy to pay higher and higher prices, and the ask is definitely more happy, or more than happy to sell at higher and higher prices. The what else? So I'm just checking over my notes. Do we think that there's more? Is there more bid or more ask?
Seems like there's
It's
more
ask.
bid.
I would say ask because it's driving the price up a little bit.
So
do you think
I
in
would
that, like,
say I would say there's more bid because, like, as the people selling on the ask side end up selling and they run out, then the bidders have to go to a higher price to find another person selling.
Mhm.
And so I would say that there are more bidders than sellers. There's more people buying, there's more demand. Pushes
Right.
prices
I was
up, and so-
confused. I agree
Gotcha.
with Conway.
It's okay, dude. I say the wrong answers all the time.
Yeah.
Let's
I,
go.
I still get things wrong, like hence the pages of notes I have, right? But I think what Tim was getting at, in if you were thinking about like the value of the asset, the ask is more, right? Because the price keeps going up. But just in terms of like, if we like pulled together all the people that are buying and pulled together all the people that were selling, it seems like there would be more bidders, just like what Conway said, where as the seller sells, their next seller is located upstream, but now we have still just enough bid that is like, this is a reasonable price, and they go in and they pay the price, liquidity continues to drop, price continues to go up. The one thing that is worth noting, a particular instance here in zone 1. Oopsies. Where is it? Right, we're going to zoom in, because so when I look at a stock and I'm trying to figure out where everyone's positioned, I do what we just did, where kind of just a general sense of, all right, this is going up, this is going down. How do I reason that out? Sometimes though, it's fun to like get a little nitty gritty. And we see right here, imagine if that arrow was drawn correctly. Right here, what's particular about this price action right here?
It's going outside of the expected range.
Right.
So the buying is so aggressive that it's exceeding the expected price range. It looks like for a couple of days in a row.
Right. And so we see that the price is exceeding the expected price range. And we also see during this period, hold on, let me draw, oops, another attempt at a straight line.
Yeah, that is odd, isn't it? Volatility was actually dropping for that 2-day period where the price moved sharply up.
Right. So what does that tell you? We have a situation here within zone 1 where the price moved greater than the expected price range, which tells us that someone is doing something aggressive. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And we see that volatility dropped pretty substantially in that period. In fact, that really is the main reason, like if we draw like the overall trend in volatility, we see that that drop is really why that trend is so significantly downward. Like the volatility is going down, and then it gets to that point and it falls off a lead cliff. Lead cliff? That's not a real thing. So what happened in this moment in time?
Sellers were more than happy to sell to people aggressively wanting to buy.
Right. So
and so therefore price went up and volatility went down because the sellers facilitated that trade, and the buyers were chomping at the bit to buy those shares.
Exactly. So who had the cost of opportunity?
It's a 50-50, and I'm not even going to attempt it.
Well,
Who
who
had
is,
the cost of opportunity?
yeah, who seems to
Um,
be the one that is like, all right, I have to pay this much to get
okay. The
this stock.
buyers.
I kind of gave it away with the buyers, right? But
Yeah.
notice the bid, they're the ones that are aggressively expending more money to enter this position. And they're doing so eagerly because, and we know they're, I don't know why I keep changing to blue. We know that they're doing that because IV is dropping. So they're not even hesitating. The cost of their opportunity or the cost of their stability, kind of difficult to parse out which one here, but it's high enough that no matter where the ask is, they're going to meet it. And in fact, we already said that we were positive that the bid, there was more bid than there was ask. So this further tells us that whatever party was in this 2-3 days purchasing these shares, driving the price up, typically larger than expected price movements do what for volatility? They increase it, right?
They
Like,
increase,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, if we go back to like the idea of like market's expectations, if I just note that the stock that I thought was going to move 2% today just moved 5% today, well, I would expect volatility to go up. But we see here the volatility is going down. And that's because that is telling us that the bid is more than willing to go and meet at the ask. There is some cost associated with their position. Either they need to get these shares or they really want to get these shares. So in that scenario as well, who is providing liquidity? Who is providing question mark? Who's providing liquidity in this situation?
Sellers.
The sellers, right? They're the ones that are allowing whatever positional need, whatever the cost of opportunity or the cost of stability that the bid has. They're the ones that are allowing that position to be stable, to occur. So then the people who are taking liquidity is the bid. And this may seem esoteric, but then what if so now we've established who the liquidity providers are and the liquidity takers are, and we see that the bid has this unseen obligation, right? But note that we can now start tracking down that unseen obligation. It has to be somewhere, right? In our examples, it would be hard to track down because Betty's outside obligation was in her bakery. But this is probably a market maker, an options dealer, an institutional trader. And so those obligations aren't going to be hidden from us. We might be able to sniff them out. And it's these moments in time where we can identify that cost of opportunity, that cost of stability. Reasonable? Everything in the market is connected. That's the main take-home point from today. All right, let's zoom back in. Let's go to zone 2. Where is zone 2? Mid-June to August. Yes. Ta-da. Do I want to include? Oh, you know what? Let's talk about it. I don't think it's in my notes, but notice what's the difference? Sorry for the angles. So here we also have, I need to get I have a ruler. Do you think, would that be nerdy for me to use? Eventually I'm going to need to, then my lines are terrible. We have another instance of greater than expected movements in price. Pretend that's what I wrote. And in this case, however, the stock is going down and IV is going up. So what happened? What changed between here and here? What's the difference? Something changed here. Some dynamic in this stock changed. And we can pinpoint this because, again, we know the market's expectations and we can measure liquidity.
Is it the bidders are now driving the price?
Perfect. And now, are there more bidders or more sellers now?
It seems more sellers.
Right. Who's providing liquidity?
The buyers are? Wait,
Yep.
yeah.
Who's taking liquidity?
The sellers.
Perfect. And again, this might be insightful because what if we went back on the data, the reports for Apple, and we saw that right at June, just as a total example, I don't actually know. What if we saw, I don't know, let's say 1,000 dealer long calls were opened up. Since the options dealer now has a crap ton of long delta, and let's say they were like at the money, their deltas are like 0.8.
Yeah, they got to sell pretty aggressively to hedge.
Right. So now we know where'd all those new sellers come from. And this also might be helpful because now we know that hedging can occur in the lit and it can occur in the dark, right? And I'm just kind of taking us where this all can lead, because now we know, well, unless I can identify another source of sellers, maybe it might have just been like a institution selling off, but kind of weird because the price is going up, has been going up, and there's been eager bid as the price has gone up. But we seem to have this sudden influx of sellers. And I can identify that the options dealers now have this sudden influx of selling requirement. And now I can identify that it's occurring in the lit. And I can quantify how much it's occurring in the lit. So then I can move over to the dark market and say, what happened in the dark market on the start of June? Do I see any big changes? Do I see any not big changes? And so we can start piecing together what exactly happened in June. Where did the bid go? Where did the ask go? Where did this new demand come from? Where was it routed? Pretty nifty, huh?
As an aside, and I know this is not something that you particularly pay attention to because you're about VOEX, but there's also some macro stuff that happened at around that time in June that kind of coincides with that sell-off. For example, the CPI report came out
Was that
on June 10th. Well, I mean, it comes out, regularly.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it was a 9.1. It was like some crazy high CPI.
Yeah, that would be right
number.
around there.
Quantitative tightening also started in June, but officially it didn't take place until the 15th. So consumer sentiment survey, same thing on June 10th. So
it's pretty nifty. I didn't know that.
Yeah, curious.
Yeah, no, it is. But notice too, with that in mind, like with the macro inside, if I wanted to hunt down exposures, like, okay, so I would ask myself, who's exposed, who needed to reposition themselves because of these numbers? Probably some large institutions, probably some of the mega large banks. Then I would probably just start hunting through the market. Well, where did liquidity not disappear from? Where did liquidity disappear from? And if you collect enough of these data points, instances where the a swarm of ask enters and overtakes the bid, now you can start, I don't know, maybe figuring out where these large institutions are positioned, because you can see it in the liquidity. Because when they make big moves, liquidity changes pretty drastically. And if you can and if you can look at it also happens in stock A and stock B, but it doesn't happen in stock C. Curious. So on and so forth. Especially if they're like sector stocks. All right. Zone 3, we got. Oh, wait, we didn't even do zone 2. All right, zone 2 is pretty standard, right? What's going on in zone 2?
Price up, volatility down, same situation at the very beginning of zone 1.
Right. Which is curious too, because what does that tell us about, again, this event? Oh.
That event looks like forced selling. It's like, I need to get out now, and I don't care if there are buyers or not. I am willing to sell for a lower price if I have to. Just get me out.
Yeah. And the idea that it seems like maybe a singular event.
Yeah.
What was needed was done, and then they moved from the market, because right after that, I mean, liquidity kind of goes crazy, but we resume what we had going on at the very start, which is the classic price goes up, volatility goes down, the bid, the ask, they're happy with each other, you know. And also, I mean, just note though too, if we were to say, I don't know, but just it is cool to note how, well, let me make this smaller. Look at just how nicely Apple behaves, right? Like if it touches the EPR or goes below it, it immediately bounces back up. So when it supersedes these EPR events, they're kind of significant because Apple doesn't seem to do that all that much. It rides the EPR event or the EPR upper limit almost an entire week here. So that means that someone somewhere, probably the bid, because they're the ones driving the price, has a reasonable expectation of what that price should be. And once the price gets there, they hold off on their bid. Another piece of the puzzle.
Well, clearly, if something jumps out of its volatility range, like the Bollinger Bar or the ATR or the volatility cone that you can derive from the options, obviously that was an unexpected move. And if it is consistent, then basically you have not only a trend, but actually buyers that are eager or willing to pay a very large premium. Not only the price goes up, but it goes much more than it should.
Mm-hmm.
So they're still fighting for that liquidity. That means that they're either forced into that situation or there is amazing news or something that inhibits and motivates the buyers to not only buy higher prices, but actually at a premium.
Right. And that is...
So he's saying it's being forced up right now, basically. It's being forced up, this stock, Apple. Is that right?
Yeah, this can happen either, something extremely good happen, or you're forced due to margin, or you're short, like if the market is short and it gaps up, everybody will react.
But to Justin's point, even like the consistencies of those going outside of the bands and going right back, the consistency, and that's not what Apple usually does. It really seems like the dealers are driving the price up behind the scenes, or somehow there's some kind of confidence in something that's really not in the, market.
Well,
right
I
don't know.
I think we should look at it from another direction. Price doesn't go up because the offer backs. So price doesn't go up because I will lift my offer. Price goes up first and foremost because of buyers. Now, the more motivated they are, regardless of the reason, the more the force put on the underlying, whatever, the Apple, will be greater. And then obviously to that dynamic, market makers, dealers, whatever, would go, take a step back each time and try to run away from that demand with their offers. But it doesn't work the other way around.
Yeah, but it's a great point, because is that when it disappears, when the dealers step away, is that when it then turns the other direction? Like they're watching it, and
right.
Somehow they are in control, right? We know that.
Right. And these are actually all really good points. And I think I wish I knew how to manage time. We'd be able to get to part 2 today. But what if we could, I don't know, measure hedging requirements? What if we could see that, for instance, here, so there was a positive hedging requirement, and then here there's no hedging requirement, right? So once we can start identifying, and I think with, again, I'm sorry, Itai was saying with, oh God, it just left my brain again. The demand, like do they have demand? Are they eager to get into this? And that just all harkens back to, does the bid have a cost of stability? Is there something that they need to do, or do they have a cost of opportunity? Is there good news, right? Is there something that they are looking forward to and they are aggressively entering this position because they want that opportunity to benefit from whatever they perceive is going to happen, or if it's good news.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
And this is what this can tell you, because let's say, what if every time the price rose above the expected price range, let's just say, what if volatility was going up during this period in time between July and August? What would that tell us?
That it is being driven by a lack of buyers. Is that right? No, a lack of something.
So no, you're good. Yeah, no, that's is who is. We'll say like who is, if the price is going up and volatility is going up, who is driving the price?
Buyers.
Well, obviously you need buyers for that situation.
Right. But who is?
But if we go back to Sally and I forgot the other name.
Betty.
So we said that the more participants are resided on one side, either on the ask or the offer, and there's only theoretically one opposite to them, so he has the power and he controls the price. But I think we should think about it a bit differently. So let's say the one that is I forgot her name. So the one on the right that we saw before, yeah, Betty. So she comes to work. She thinks it's a regular day. She's going to sell or play around with the price a bit, maybe, depends. But then she comes and she sees 20 buyers, right? Mm-hmm. So now she's saying, okay, this is not a regular day. Basically, I'm going to take advantage of the situation and try to drive price up as much as I can. Mm-hmm. And depending on the amount of the demand, I might even spike the volatility up because this is crazy. Maybe they know something I don't.
Right. Also, real quick, do just note, me and Conway were talking about earlier, notice the reference to the market maker spiking volatility. But correct. So that's what I was getting at here is, notice that if the real driver of this price is the ask, when Betty, now she's a market maker, she gets in and she says, yo, look at all that demand over there. Maybe she's not a market maker, maybe she's price sensitive, she's a large institution, whatever. And she says, look at all that demand over there. Like, there's tons of it. I'm reading the order book. It's crazy. And I'm one of the only sellers here. So I'm just going to keep rising my price and rising the price. And the reason we know that this is the ask is doing this opportunistically, because the bid isn't eagerly going to the ask. They're kind of being dragged up to the ask. And we know that because volatility, however we want to measure it, is increasing. The large pool of bid has some cost of stability, or they have some cost of opportunity. They want to get in on this action. And so Betty, the baking market maker, is taking advantage of this. She's continuously rising her ask and ask and ask, because she knows that the bid's going to eventually capitulate and meet her at the ask. But because in doing so, things are running less smoothly, like clearly all of the bid would be a lot happier if she didn't do this, and all the trades could just occur, bloop, 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 bloop. Things would be super liquid, so volatility would fall or remain the same. But here we explicitly see in this situation that as volatility gets up and the price is going up, that means the bid is having a harder and harder time finding like a counterparty.
All right. So they have to keep raising their bid or slam the market order to get the ask just to get into the trade.
Right. Or they just sit there on the sidelines and wait for the trade to go down, right? Or they jump line.
Right.
They say, oh, crap, I think if this keeps going on, it might be way more expensive tomorrow. So I better just jump ahead of everyone right now and get my fill. I need to pay for that opportunity to get my trade.
There's one more thing. At a certain point, the whole market, both the buyers and the sellers, become buyers in this example, because not only the seller widens the spread in both volatility and the price, mm-hmm. but he eventually needs also to hedge. And as the market is going up, he will have he will be basically also competing with the buyers on the hedge.
Mhm. Which would drive volatility up even further because now you're adding.
Which would make him also a buyer. So, yeah. So at certain instances, there are only buyers.
Right. And this, I think, is when I think that you hit the nail on the head of this is why this occurs.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
there are times when the market makers or the large institutions that are, kind of playing around with these prices, there's limits, right? They know that exceeding certain limits will put them in a position where they will now need to become bidders. They will, their inventory is low, what have you. They have certain mandates of the quotas that they have to keep for their stocks. And so, and they can see the order book, blah, blah, blah. And so they stop. When we get to a certain point, I withdraw the ask, and now there's no one's accepting these bids, so the price stalls, right? Or the price like slowly floats down as people think, crap, I got in this too late, and let me just get rid of this position real quick.
Or you get a circuit break.
Or which seems to be a lot more common lately than it used to be, for sure. What are the circuit breaker rules like in Europe, actually?
Oh, they're pretty much the same. I mean, everything is around, like you have a couple, like after, if you have 8% drop, it would stall for X amount of time, then it will reopen, give the market another chance to find a value. And then if it drops another certain amount, that's it. They stop the trading and opens next day.
Very cool.
Yeah. I think in America it's 10% and we get 3.
Yeah, there's, oh God, this is cobwebs. I know it's a percentage. I'll agree that it's 10, but it also is time-based. I think it's
7. I think it's 7%.
7%.
I'm not sure though.
I'll take it.
I think it is.
I'm not confident on it, but what I do remember is that there is a time component. Like if 2 circuit breakers go off before noon, I think the security is done trading for the rest of the day. But if the second circuit breaker occurs after noon, it kind of counts as 2 distinct events. So it doesn't full stop the trading of the security. If I'm wrong about that, since this is going to go up on YouTube, correct me in the comments. But I'm almost positive that's how it works in some fashion. All right, pretty cool. Let's do one more and then we'll wrap it up. What is this let me see which one is more fun.
It says the S&P is at 7, 13, and 20%.
7, 13, and 20%.
Okay.
U.S. regulations have 3 levels of a circuit breaker, which are set to halt trading when the S&P 500 index drops 7, 13, and 20%.
Oh, all right.
I guess that's on the same day.
Yeah. That sounds familiar.
Yeah, I think in my memory, 2020 was the only time that like the S&P circuit braked that I know. But I know I definitely just occurred before. All right, let's look at this one. I'll give you the zones. You know what? Let's do it. Don't make fun of me, but I'm going to grab.
Get that ruler, Justin.
You want me to get it?
Let's go.
The reason I'm so excited to get the heat maps up on the thing.
Look at that line. Beautiful.
The reason I'm super excited to get the interactive heat maps on the dashboard is because this is the ruler I use to like mark the position on the heat maps physically.
Okay.
It's kind of like so you can say I'm a professional ruler or mid-July. I'm assuming I was implying here. And then post mid-July. So 1, 2, and 3. And I just kind of leaf through the reports looking for this stuff.
By the way, I apologize, but I'll need to be leaving soon. It's 9 p.m. here.
Yeah, no worries. I think now you understand why I was like, I cut this in half. We're actually doing pretty good.
No, it's okay. I was just not correctly prepared. Next time, I don't, the hours are no issues for me, but I need to like prepare for that. So I didn't do it.
Yeah, no worries. And this will be, I'll have this up on YouTube later today too. So you can watch it whenever.
Sure, I will.
So, but yeah. Feel free to pop out whenever you need. It was good having you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
And,
welcome to the group.
Yeah, seriously.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Good. I'm glad. But yeah, take a moment, look at these 3 zones, see if you see anything interesting.
The middle zone and the very beginning of zone 3 is interesting to me, because otherwise it's similar to what we saw with Apple. You know, price is going up, volatility is going down in zone 1 and most of zone 3.
Yeah, zone 1 is pretty standard, right?
Zone 2 is very turbulent, both well, in price, but volatility is pretty steadily just trending up. So liquidity is drying up. Volatility is increasing and price is just kind of chopping all over the place.
Yeah. So this
is
is
down, it goes up. Yeah.
So I guess for zone 1 standard, right? And then for zone 2, I always ask myself, like when I'm just, and I use this chart on the reports pretty often, because I want to know who's capitulating, if it's identifiable.
I just also would like to point out at the very end of the price, how it just sticks on that line the whole way up. So, I mean, we just kind of had that discussion on the Apple, how they don't go outside that range. It just sits there, right? Exactly. That whole line just is right on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also at the beginning of zone 3, look at that. Similar concept, but on the other side, it's actually consistent. Oh no, in zone 3, well, yes, that part too, but in zone 3, when the price is plummeting, it's consistently below the expected price range. Yeah, in zone 2 as well. I see that.
Yeah. So, and again, this tells us something, right? Because if some entity is moving the price aggressively, right? And we can now start to discern why. Was it because there's no counterparty? Was it because there is a over-eagerness of the cost of opportunity that was willing to be spent, or the cost of stability that was willing to be spent? Because the reason I picked this is here and here have very similar price action, but very different volatility profiles.
See that? That's crazy.
So what happened? So let's just focus on those 2, because I think you guys get the gist of like the general, like if price is going up and liquidity is going up, well, then that means bid is like clawing at the ask. So either there's no ask, or they are like very desperate and eager to get in, or if the price is going up, volatility going down, so on and so forth. I was thinking about making like a chart somehow, but I couldn't brainstorm one that was not disgusting looking yet. So, but I'll work on it. But so let's focus on 1 and 2, these 2 main events. And both these events they have the characteristic that the price has dropped, and that drop is greater than the expected price range. But in 1, IV went up, and in 2, let's say overall IV went down. I mean, it's like the IV plummeting, I will admit, is very after the fact-ish almost. If we get the handy dandy ruler out. Actually, no, never mind.
And it's hard for me to take this without talking about Conway's context about June 10th and all those data points that came out for that first go round, and then what happened the second one.
But that's perfect though, because maybe we can group those into a external market requirement, right?
Yeah.
Like if we can identify something occurred outside of IBM, outside of the bid-ask spread of IBM, that affected the liquidity of IBM. It decreased liquidity and the price dropped. So what does that tell us? So what happened in zone 1? So we said the price plummeted. There was an eagerness. So let's put it this way. Who was driving the price in zone 1? Who was setting the beat to the drum that everyone was dancing?
The bid.
The bid.
Yeah,
The bid,
the
right?
buyer.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they were under no obligation to buy it at the price, at a higher price. So yeah,
Right.
buyer.
Now, was there more bid or was there
Oh, more sell for sure.
seller? Why more seller?
We can see it in the price action, right? It drops below EPR. The price does indeed go down very aggressively, very sharply. Volatility is spiking as well. So, yeah, it seemed like sellers were desperate to get out of that position. So
Right.
there were more sellers, and the buyers were in control. They had no obligation to buy it.
Right. So who had the cost of opportunity?
The sellers paid the price.
Right. And who had the cost of stability? Sellers, right?
The buyers.
Again, no, the
The
sellers,
sellers.
right? Because again, we
Cost of
can't.
Oh, the
stability.
sell.
The reason why bringing up like the CPI prints and all that was good because sometimes we need. This is the step that we kind of need to sometimes make some assumptions. Was it opportunistic selling, or actually, how do I want to backtrack on all that? But it is important to identify who is burdening the cost of the stability or burdening the cost of opportunity. Because 1 and 2, we'll put it over here, we can identify if the cost of stability, if it is the cost of stability, or like if it's greater or less than the cost of opportunity. We can identify that. So we'll put that over there on the side and we'll figure that out later. Who was in zone 1? Who was providing liquidity? Who was your liquidity provider?
The buyers.
Yep. And liquidity takers?
The sellers.
Sellers. Good. So we've kind of just conceptualized zone 1, right? We had an instance where the sellers were eager to leave. There were more sellers than bid. Volatility was increasing. Liquidity was diminishing. How do we know? We're going to get to that later, I guess. So let's look at zone 2. Zone 2, we said, is characterized by the price dropping way more than the EPR. But this time, volatility dropped off a cliff.
Literally, yeah.
Literally dropped off a cliff. So who capitulated?
Sellers definitely capitulated here, right? Okay. Every time you do that.
It's a bit of a trick question.
Yeah.
It's just confusing because you would think the sellers are driving.
Because
But
the price
apparently the bidders are. Yeah.
the
Violently.
bidders.
No, I only said that due to the process of elimination.
Mhm.
Right.
But there's
I'm not quite seeing why yet.
there's a hidden option. Who? Let's see how our friends Betty and Sally are doing. When Betty and Sally, actually, let's go. I think this would be more appropriate. When Betty and Sally were selling apples back and forth, and Dan the doctor was trying to figure out where's this price going to go. We said that occasionally Betty and Sally would agree to the price, even if the price went up a little bit, if it went down a little bit. Overall, the value for them was still there, even if the apple was $1.25 or if the apple was 75 cents, whatever it was. In this situation, if say the apple went up by the 5 cents, so Betty the baker paid 5 more cents than she wanted, was she really capitulating here? Not really, right? Like she wasn't resistant to paying that extra 5 cents. She just said, oh, okay, this happens
It's more
occasionally.
like a negotiation.
Yeah, hey, listen, sometimes I pay 5 cents more, sometimes I pay 5 cents less. It's the rules of the road. By Jeff. Right? But so the trick is, not the trick, but the hidden is that no one here is capitulating. Why is no one capitulating?
Volatility was high. Neither side could come to an agreement. And so I think what you're suggesting is Dr. Dan, the market maker, is stepping in here to facilitate the trade.
Well, let's say this. What is the bid wants what? Does he want a high price or a low price?
Bid wants a low price.
Low price, right? And so is there anything that is the bid is resistant to in the event that, say, the ask immediately comes to the bid and says, I'll sell whatever you want?
Sure. I mean, I would get nervous. Like, why was that so easy? Why was there no resistance? Is this price going to keep going down? Maybe I need to lower my bids.
Maybe. Or, right, exactly, you could lower your bids. And if you lower your bids and then more ask still comes eagerly, hey, I want to sell these shares. What's the price going to do?
The price is going to keep going down.
And if this happened on like an extreme event where, I mean, you just have waves of the ask coming to you, and no matter, again, your goal is to get the lowest price possible. So you just say, all right, I'll drop the price again. And still more ask comes and you go, all right, I'll drop the price again. And more ask comes. What's liquidity going to do? It's going to drop, right?
Down.
Yeah, because like as soon as you drop the price, even though you're dropping the price, you still now have an immediate meet at your bid.
Yeah, because I guess if buyers were willing to buy it at that high price, then they easily buy it because sellers keep coming down to meet the bid.
Exactly.
It's smooth. Yeah.
Yeah. So we see here that no one is really capitulating because the ask or the people selling seem to be flooding the bid, and they're doing it aggressively, right? Like they're doing it so much so that they're exceeding the price range. And in fact, if you were the bid, if you were the counterparty or the market maker, you in this instance, although you're probably typically sensitive to moving the stock's price too much, this is a bargain sale. You know, there's two diametrically opposed situations here where the sellers, for whatever reason, have the cost of opportunity or the cost of they need to offload these shares. And so the bid is like, all right, well, let's do it. Let me get the lowest price I can. And so it's good for them to just blow by the EPR because they're getting a huge discount sale. So no one is really capitulating. The bid wants the lowest price. So who is providing liquidity? Who is providing liquidity?
The bid, I think.
Yeah, I think it's the buyers again.
All right. So what would happen? The buyer drops his price, and then all of a sudden there's no ask.
Then it all dries up, the price stabilizes.
Right. So who's supplying liquidity? Because then what would the bid have to do in order to,
have to go up?
He'd have to rise his price back up, right?
Yeah. So the sellers are providing liquidity?
Yeah, it's kind of weird, right? But we see where like the presence and the abundance of the ask, and they're seemingly like, because also note, the reason we can make some of these assumptions is because the price moved way more than the expected price range. So traditionally, you would expect volatility to go up. Like, think the stock is getting more volatile. The stock is tanking. Even if it was the volatility goes up, yeah, no, you would expect the price to go up, right? And that's true even if the volatility would go up, and that's true typically even if the price is going up significantly more than it should. Things are just getting more volatile. But we have here where the price is not only moving more than the expected price range, it's moving down, and liquidity is dropping. So this is telling us that the sellers are the ones, they're here kind of, they're the ones making this happen. And the bid is happy to go along for the ride because they just keep dropping their price lower and lower.
I just want to throw some macro context into here because I'm looking at my calendar from back then.
Oh yeah, do it.
Well, monthly options expiration was July 15th, and that we're right in the middle of July here. But earlier before that, there was a lot of chatter on Twitter and in the financial news media that, we're maybe entering into an earnings recession because look at what happened last earnings season with, Target and Walmart and everybody having like all these inventory problems and having depressed earnings and profit margins and all this other stuff. So there was quite a bit of fear in the markets at the time. Entering into that earnings season.
Curious. And actually,
also, Vixpiration was the week after, and I don't know much about Vixpiration, but the notes that I wrote down was that if Vixpiration happens after monthly options expiration, it can be more difficult to hedge positions. So I think there was some increased anxiety in the markets. And as Voex teaches us, when there's instability in the markets, the natural direction is for things to go down.
Things go down. Unstable systems don't last, right? And I mean, you could take some of the early videos of the Wright brothers trying to get those wonky planes up in the air. Right? They don't hold together when they're not stable. But also you reminded me, that's super curious that you said OPEX, because what if I told you, so suppose the drastic drop in price and volatility, we're going to make the assumption that it occurs at or around OPEX. I forgot that it was so early that month. What does that tell us? It tells us, I mean, everything. Maybe, assuming it's OPEX, assuming IBM had, let's say IBM had net dealer short, is that right? So have to do some math. Yeah, net dealer short delta. And then OPEX occurs. Delta skyrockets, right? Like that short delta expires. So in essence, I get more long delta. I like dig myself out of the hole of the short delta. As that happens, what do I do?
You got to sell.
You got to sell. So we just identified the cost of stability right here.
And
because
time,
because the options dealers are price insensitive. They will consistently meet at the bid if they need to aggressively hedge. And supposing it's OPEX, so you have a large amount, it'd be interesting to go back in IBM to see if any large open interest options expired that caused the options dealers to be like, wow, we have a lot of short delta to offload, so we need to offload these short, we need to sell to the market.
And this ties into our discussion last week too, regarding price movements. Well, price movements the week before and after OPEX, although that was like brought into season. This is IBM specifically, so right. Maybe never mind.
I mean, still good to keep in the back of your mind, right? Because it's a point where you can distinctly say with a pretty high level of confidence, especially if this occurred, like say OPEX was right here. So like you had that delta unwinding a little bit before OPEX, and then obviously after you still kind of hedging out or taking on new long deltas. So you would have to sell shares anyway. You have, just by looking at this, the liquidity and the price action, you know that the you knew to look for an instance where sellers were meeting the bid in a price insensitive way. So were they trying to eagerly get out of a position? And there was plenty of bid around, or did they have a demand to sell those shares? And so you kind of just, you start questioning all these things of why this would occur. And it just so happens that it seems like one jumped out at us. Well, this could have been options dealers offloading their delta unwinding. And what does that do for us in terms of, I mean, there's, I guess, several consequences, some academic, some, but if I was a trader and kind of just talking about like actionable, what does this do for me? What does it do for me? Like, what is being able to identify why this most likely happened? What does it do for me?
If you can identify it, probably you can say that it's going to go up once it stabilizes. I mean,
exactly,
something like that.
No, 100%, right? Like, that this dip isn't because it is something that someone knows somewhere about IBM that we don't. We can look at, again, this is assuming like if we did look at the data and it all lined up, that it looked like this was the delta unwinding. This isn't a sell-off event. This maintains my long-term confidence. It also tells me, did these positions get refilled? Is this going to be a recurring event for IBM? Is some options dealer or some institutional trader repeatedly opening these positions? What positions are they? When are their expiries? Why are they being opened?
I guess we could look in the past for that as well. Yeah.
You could look in the past reports, right? You could look at that's what the data on the dashboard is for. And you can start pinpointing, oh, this is a pattern. And it does seem to be associated with the options dealers. And it is associated with OPEX. OPEX is approaching in a week. Huh. Right? And we got all of that with three pieces of information: the price movement, volatility, and then Conway reminding us that OPEX was on the 15th. And now we could potentially, if all the data maps out, but this is kind of how the process works of finding opportunities in the market, like these big play opportunities, because now we just go back in IBM and say, well, is this a recurring event? And then do I see the similar behavior, CPRX, do I see similar behavior occurring, like being set up for the future?
And IBM has just been a very well-behaved stock for the whole year in a market that's been down, now is 15, was 25 and 30.
Right. And we can even maybe go a step further and say, it almost looks like this, because you're right, like even when IBM touches the upper like EPR limits, it very, very rarely supersedes them. It kind of just hovers right there. But if I took a gander, I would say somewhere here was the previous OPEX. And look what the price started doing. It started being super unwell behaved. Now IBM is consistently going outside the EPR limits. And it's in the same
really
trajectory as the massive drop off. It's always seeming to go below, pretend I drew an arrow there, below the expected price range. Very curious, right? So we can identify who's capitulating. In this case, no one. We can identify that there seems to be a cost of opportunity, or the cost of stability, which in this case it's turning out to look like it might be hedging. And we can see that there's a very distinct behavior associated within this time frame of OPEX to OPEX. So it might be curious to see, well, what was happening on IBM in this period. You know what I mean? You just start pulling the threads.
I think that June OPEX was like a super duper one, right? I think
was it like the one they were talking, like the ultra mega one?
Yeah, right. So I think that might have been why the instability afterwards until the next one. And now look, it goes right back. So, I mean, it's just kind of interesting because they had to resituate themselves at that point after June, I believe.
But also, let's suppose you went through the market and you said, you know, you say you write your program in R, and you say, hey, I want to know every stock that had a greater than average, more than EPR movement between this date in June, whenever the OPEX was, and this date in July, whenever the OPEX was. And suppose you got like a list of stocks. Then you could go through the raw data and say, okay, is there any similarities on the exchanges that these options went through? Can I start pinpointing this basket of stocks that had very similar behavior? Who were the actual players in this basket?
It's so deep. I mean, you get into like a super deep dive here, Justin.
I'm telling you, this is like liquidity is everything. Liquidity, when you play in the market, you are either giving liquidity or taking it. Me and you guys, we're not doing much with liquidity. You know what I mean? Like,
no,
fat thing.
Yeah,
there,
we're
but,
small fish in a big sea.
But the beauty is
we just have a straw in there
right.
trying to grab a little bit.
Yeah, but all we have to do really is look for the big waves. And this is how you do it, because every time a whale moves through the market, it makes a wave. And that wave is liquidity. Everything is based on liquidity. So that's a great place to end. Do you guys have, so this was part one, where we kind of, again, like just working through the conceptualization of liquidity, can I get a feel for it? And then next week, we're gonna get a little nerdy, we'll bring out some math, but then we're gonna essentially improve VWAP by genuinely just adding a touch of liquidity, which is, we're gonna see how we can parse out volume and make it 1,000 times more informative when you know, is that volume being forced? Is it organic? Is there a cost of stability somewhere? Is this volume taking liquidity? Is it adding liquidity? So on and so forth. And VWAP is actually, once modified, pretty potent. I mean, I still don't use it, but whatever. But that was today. I'll
be there, and I'll be there. And again, great effort, wonderful lecture, and I'll talk to you guys during the week.
Yeah, thank you for joining, and see you guys later. Thank you, Tim.
Take it easy.
Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, no worries. But Conway, what was that stock you wanted?
I wanted to talk about HRB, but if you want to save it for the Discord or if you want to record it here, it's totally up to you. I don't mind either way.
What is it, HRB?
Yeah, because we've been looking at and talking about H&R Block for a while, and it just recently the volatility dropped off a cliff, but also, you know, maybe a month ago when we were looking at the VOEX for it, it was indicating that this VOEX potential was unstable, and since then it's only gone higher.
I know, it's very annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, yeah, because VOEX spiked down, but it never technically reached the propagation zone, which is problematic. So the criteria for VOEX divergence is VOEX starts to head down, which it was doing, and then hits the inhibition zone. But the second kind of leg up, I'm just looking here in July, VOEX never actually kind of technically reached divergence. Like VOEX just rose, it kind of just spiked, but then it never dipped into the propagation zone, which is unfortunate. The hedging heat map is wild. Volatility did drop off a cliff, and volatility dropped off a cliff with a drastic price increase. So what does that tell you?
Volatility dropping off a cliff, liquidity's very liquid, but price is going up. So buyers are happy to buy and sellers keep selling to them.
Yeah.
And sellers have no obligation to sell, so they just keep selling for higher and higher prices. Wow, this hedging heat map is wild.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. For the viewers at home, check it out. But what I'm most interested in, I think we will save this for later because I actually think this is pretty interesting, is right after August, the initial spike in volatility is met with like little to no price movement, which is curious. And then
yeah, I'm seeing that.
Like at the peak of volatility, once the price then starts shooting up, that's when liquidity starts entering. So like I'd want to know, why was there like it seems like a 1 to 3 day period where volatility rose very drastically. I mean, it's almost like 10%. What do we got here? From 0.4 to 0.5 in 3 days, but the price didn't budge. That's curious. So yeah, let's save this for later. That definitely might be interesting. Maybe I haven't done a Reddit DD in a while. Maybe it'll be time to do one.
Maybe, yeah. This actually, what you just said about it spiking down but not reaching the propagation zone, that kind of brings us to SPY versus QQQ for this upcoming week.
Yeah.
Which also ties into last week's discussion about monthly options expiration, because, you know, things were starting to look pretty unstable, and that was a very sharp spike down that we saw. You know, as you tweeted about all the gamma squeezes that appeared in the market after this monthly options expiration.
Pretty abnormal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And today's Sunday, so it's going to be a very interesting week coming up.
Yeah.
For sure. So we'll see how SPY does and how QQQ does, because it seems like this could be an inflection point for the market.
Yeah, I'm curious. I think I love OPEX and I hate it. Because on Monday, just so much could change, right? Like, it really depends on how people want to reposition themselves in the next month. And it seems like over the Monday, Tuesday, and a little bit on Wednesday is when people really start to position themselves. And so it's kind of like, here's where the data is. But I think more than normal, the data prints on Monday and Tuesday, especially for forecasting both the week and further out, are like slightly more important than they usually are.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
Which is a little like, I don't like, right? But it is what it is, just because like sometimes those options, like we talk a lot about options and derivatives with respect to VARX. I think it's one of the more apparent manifestations or influences on VARX. But and one of the things is like when there's these large changes, that's when like VARX is like, all right, I'm looking over here now. And so it can sometimes change a little bit more than I would like.
Yeah, because like currently what the VOEX is suggesting to me, my interpretation of it is that like, watch out, the market's going to go down. But that is in exact contrast to our talk last week, which suggests that, you know, the week after monthly options expiration, indices tend to go up pretty substantially.
Yeah, and so, I talk about that in the weekly email, because again, like that's because I think maybe not recognizing the week before OPEX kind of bit us in the ass this week, even though it was like maybe it's because I wrote the weekly email on Saturday, so, and then we did our talk on Sundays, and I just already completely forgotten about the data for the next week. But there's some things that I point out in the weekly email too, though, about typically VARX doesn't respond as violently to OPEX. Typically you don't get such a large increase in gamma squeezes post OPEX, so there is unfortunately like more than what we would like in terms of mitigating factors for our outlook in the future. You know, if VARX didn't drop like a lead weight, if the number of gamma squeezes in the market didn't go up by 345, which is a pretty significant jump, I would be more inclined to go with that bullish post OPEX stance. But with those other kind of extra data points, you kind of got to tweeze it out a little bit, and I think be a little bit nimble-footed in the week ahead.
Yeah, I am completely in agreement with you there.
You know,
definitely
like,
stay cautious.
Oh, for sure. Because like, so, you know, like, but again, at the same time, like there are times when the market may present its hand pretty easily. Like if we go into Monday and SPY drops 1%, like right off the bat, I'm going to assume that VARX is going to drop into the propagation zone with that data print. So, you know what I mean? Like I'll shift gears because that is what I would expect to occur in an unstable market, which that VARX response is unstable to begin with. But, you know, if the market kind of floats along / goes up, that's when you're like, all right, I really kind of need to see the data prints here, because it's just not acting how I would expect a quote unquote unstable stock to behave. So
yeah, I was thinking exactly the same thing. You know, if it doesn't respond the way the data is telling me right now, either sit on hands or keep positions light, tight stops, be careful. And if things match the data, then I'm more confident.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like if everything seems to be moving in line with the data, like early on, you know, you can not trust the data and sit on your hands, or you can just say, hey, listen, this is what the data is saying. This is what I expected to happen, and it's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed accordingly, which is exactly why I actually bought a whole bunch of call spreads for next week on SPY, because it's post OPEX week. And then I saw Vox's response on Friday, and I was like, cool, thank you.
Well, at least they're spreads. At least they're
Yeah,
spreads.
hopefully we'll see. So, but I'll leave it here, and thank you everyone for joining, obviously. And I'll probably just upload this later today. I just, you know, do some editing and whatnot and then upload it. So
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Justin.
Yeah, of course, guys. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you guys next week and or on Discord in a second. So, all right, guys, have a good one. Bye.